Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're looking at something a little bit different, corporate social responsibility, but from a whole new angle. CSR,
Mhm.
we've got this super interesting journal article from Personnel Psychology, and it's all about like the inner workings of companies when they're trying to, do good in the world.
Yeah, it's kind of like sell 'em a miniature tertiary charity.
Yeah.
Looking under the hood of a shiny new car, we all see the CSR initiatives, all the donations, the eco-friendly labels, all that stuff. But this deep dive, it really helps us to understand,
Like people think
and,
about,
and the motivations
yeah,
that are actually driving those actions. It gets into like the nitty-gritty of
yeah.
human resources and organizational behavior, the micro foundations of CSR. That's what they call it.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So, just so we're all starting on the same page,
Yeah.
when we say CSR, what are we actually talking about?
Yeah, you're right. That term gets thrown around a lot. I think essentially what we're talking about here is companies going beyond just following the law. So it's about taking actions that benefit society or the environment or, specific stakeholder groups, even if it's not legally required.
So like doing what's considered right
Yeah.
ethically, even if it maybe cuts into profits or it's not something they're legally required to do.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that, employee perceptions of a company's CSR, it can actually matter more than the objective reality of what the company is actually doing.
Really?
Yeah, this article highlights a study by Rupp and colleagues, and they found that employee feelings about their company's efforts around CSR can really impact their job satisfaction, sometimes even more than the initiatives themselves.
Wait, so you're telling me that a company could be doing all the right things, donating millions of dollars going green.
Right.
But if their employees feel like it's all for show, it kind of backfires.
That's exactly what the research is suggesting. Yeah, think about it. Like, imagine you're looking at two job offers. One company has this amazing CSR reputation, but there's all these rumors about, like, a toxic work environment. The other company, maybe they're not, saving the whales, but they're known for treating their employees fairly and respectfully. Which one are you going to pick?
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. So it's not enough to just like slap a label on it like we're socially responsible. It has to be reflected in the company culture and how employees are actually treated. So how does this micro foundations idea fit into all of this?
Yeah, so this is where we really start to get into like the human element of it all. So the micro level is all about understanding like the individuals and the groups within a company. How do they experience and contribute to a company's efforts around CSR? What motivates them? What are the kind of internal dynamics that are at play?
So it's kind of like zooming in
Yeah.
and looking past those big picture statements and looking at the reality of how people work within these systems.
Exactly. And the research reveals some really surprising insights about how those dynamics actually work. For example, this paper really digs into how much employee perceptions of fairness actually matter. They talk about distributive justice, which is basically about how fairly resources and rewards are distributed within a company. So you can imagine, even if a company is, doing all these amazing things like saving the rainforest, but then if their own employees feel like they're being exploited, it's going to create some tension, some resentment.
Right, that totally makes sense. It's kind of like expecting your employees to be super stoked about the company donating to charity when they haven't gotten a raise in 5 years.
Exactly. And then there's another layer to this too, called deontic justice, which is really about how individuals react to injustice that's committed towards others. So even if you might be treated well within a company, if you see your colleagues, or maybe partners in your supply chain being mistreated, that can actually impact how you view the company's CSR efforts.
So it's not just about doing a few good deeds. It's about like an overall sense of fairness and ethical behavior. So if these employee perceptions are so important, like what can companies actually do to make sure their efforts around CSR are seen as genuine?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. This article explores things like corporate volunteer programs and even like the language that's used in job ads as really powerful tools for shaping those employee perceptions and for attracting talent that's aligned with their CSR values.
Now that's something I definitely want to hear more about. How do those programs and those job ads actually work on that micro level?
Let's dive into the details next. So we're just talking about, how companies can use these tools like volunteer programs and job ads to really shape those employee perceptions and attract people who are already kind of on board with those CSR values.
Yeah, and I'm really curious about that. It's almost like companies can kind of build a workforce that's naturally inclined to do good. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, that's the idea. Let's start with those volunteer programs. So there was some research done by Caligiuri and their colleagues, and they looked at these programs, and what they found was they can actually be like a win-win-win for the company, for the employees, and even for the organizations or the causes that they're helping.
That sounds almost too good to be true. What's the catch? Isn't it just like companies getting good PR and employees getting a day out of the office?
Well, it can be, but, if the program is designed well, there's a lot more to it than that. They found that volunteering, especially when it's done abroad, can actually boost employee skills.
Well, really? Like how?
So imagine you work for a tech company,
Yeah.
and they send you to, a developing country to help a local NGO set up their computer systems. So not only are you contributing your technical skills, you're also gaining experience in a whole new environment. You're learning about different cultures, different ways of working. It can be like a super powerful form of professional development.
Oh, yeah. I can definitely see how that would be beneficial. It's not just about, giving back. It's about personal and professional growth, too.
Exactly. And it goes back to, what we were talking about earlier about employee perceptions. Would you be more likely to view your company favorably if they offered you these kinds of opportunities?
Absolutely. I think it shows that they're invested in something bigger
Right?
than just profits,
Right.
that they're willing to invest in their employees and, make a real difference.
Exactly. And that kind of brings us to the next piece of this whole thing, which is the job ads. So Gully and their team did this really fascinating study where they experimented with different types of language in job postings. And they found that when companies specifically mentioned their social and environmental values, it actually had a big impact on who applied for those jobs.
So instead of saying, like, we're looking for a marketing whiz, they might say something like, join our team of eco-warriors and help us build a sustainable future.
Yeah, exactly. And what they found was, by using that kind of language, they were attracting this pool of candidates who were already really passionate about those values. Like, it's almost like a magnet for people who want to align their work with their beliefs.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you're someone who really cares about the environment, you're going to be drawn to companies that are like, yeah, we're all about that too.
Yeah.
But it also makes me wonder, could companies kind of use this to exploit idealistic job seekers?
That's a really good point. And I think it's super important for companies to be authentic. If their actions don't match their words, they're going to end up disillusioning those very people they attracted.
Right. It's like greenwashing.
That-
But for people, luring them in with this promise of purpose.
And then not actually delivering.
So transparency is really important here.
Absolutely.
Job seekers need to do their research.
Yeah, look beyond the feel-good language. See if their actions are matching up with their words. Look at their track record.
It seems like there's a lot of potential for things to go wrong here.
Yeah, it's a complex situation.
So we've talked about employee perceptions, volunteer programs, job ads, and this potential for, both positive and negative outcomes. Is there anything else we need to be aware of when it comes to these micro-level factors in CSR?
Well, there is one more area that I think is really interesting and maybe a little bit unsettling. This article also talks about what happens when companies do good and then they kind of use that as a justification for bad behavior later on.
Wait, you're saying that companies can use their good deeds to cover up for shady practices?
It sounds kind of counterintuitive, but that's exactly what the research suggests. And it's called moral licensing. It's kind of like how we might feel justified, indulging in a big piece of cake after a week of eating healthy and working out.
Oh, yeah, I totally get that. I've definitely used that logic myself. But how does that apply to companies?
Let's explore that next.
So welcome back, everyone. We're back talking about how sometimes these CSR efforts can have some, not so great side effects.
Yeah, exactly. And, one of the most fascinating findings from all this research is this idea of moral licensing. We were just starting to talk about this before the break.
Yeah.
This idea that companies kind of feel like they've earned the right to maybe slip up a little bit after they've done something good.
Right. You're comparing it to. That feeling of deserving a treat after you've been eating healthy and working out all week. But how does it really apply to, the actions of a company?
Okay, so think about it this way. A company, they build this reputation for being really environmentally responsible. Maybe they invest a ton of money in renewable energy or sustainable sourcing. And that builds up a kind of moral capital in the eyes of the public.
So they're seen as the good guys.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then later on, maybe they get caught cutting corners somewhere else, like in their labor practices or with product safety.
And this moral capital, it kind of protects them.
Yeah, that's what the research suggests. They might actually be able to get away with some of that questionable stuff because their overall image is still so positive. It's like they've earned this moral pass from consumers
Mm-hmm.
and stakeholders.
Kind of a scary thought. It makes you wonder if some companies are like
Yeah.
intentionally using CSR to shield themselves from, being scrutinized later on.
Yeah, it's definitely something to be aware of. This research doesn't necessarily say that that's always the case, but it does point to this possibility that moral licensing can be used, whether consciously or not, to justify bad behavior.
So what can we do about it? How can we as consumers and employees avoid falling for this?
Well, I think it comes down to critical thinking and making informed decisions. We can't just take a company's word for it. When they talk about their CSR efforts, we got to look deeper. We got to consider the whole picture, their actions, their policies, their overall impact.
So don't be fooled by flashy marketing campaigns or, a one-time donation.
Right. Look for that consistency between what they're saying and what they're actually doing. Ask yourself, are they walking the talk? Are they treating all of their stakeholders fairly, not just the ones that they highlight in their CSR report?
I feel like this deep dive has really given me a whole new perspective on CSR.
Yeah, me too.
It's so much more complex
Yeah.
than I think a lot of people realize. It's not just about, companies doing good things. It's about really understanding the motivations behind those actions and the impact they have.
Absolutely. And as we've been talking about, those motivations and those impacts are often shaped by the people within the organization. Those micro-level factors really do influence the big picture.
So to our listeners out there, the next time you see a company talking about their social responsibility, take a second to think critically. Consider the people behind the policies, the potential for things to go right, but also the potential for things to go wrong. And remember, a little bit of skepticism can go a long way.
Yeah. And don't forget, you have the power to make a difference. Support the companies that are genuinely aligned with your values. Hold them accountable when they mess up. And keep pushing for a more just and equitable world.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of CSR. Until next time.